Welcome to USIP ISIP, a weekly podcast with Northern Lights Winery founder Doug Bell, exploring the experiences from leaders in business, social media, and family. Now here's this week's exceptional guest.
Welcome to USIP ISIP. I'm Doug Bell, the host of our podcast, and I'm really excited to have Miranda Halladay joining us today. Miranda is the proprietor, the ringmaster, or the toilet cleaner, depending on the day, for Elephant Island Winery in the Naramata Bench, potentially the original fruit winery, and really one of the biggest inspirations that we had when starting Northern Lights Estate Winery. Also, just an amazing person with an amazing story. Welcome, Miranda.
Thanks for having me, Doug, and for giving me such a well-rounded and very complimentary introduction. I really appreciate that.
Well, I'm glad you didn't say it was a shitty introduction talking about cleaning toilets. But you know what? I think when you get involved in the wine industry, one thing you learn very early on is that it is not all about the glory. It's not all about the forward-facing pictures. So I'm really looking forward to getting deep into your story and finding out what makes you tick and how you derive the inspiration to put forward such an amazing facility and an amazing product towards the world. But maybe we can just take us back and transport us into the past a little bit. Where did you get started, and how did you get your love for wine and wineries and guest experience?
The winery we established almost 22 years ago now, and it was a seed that was planted by my grandparents. So the property that the winery exists on, Elephant Island, was built by my grandmother. She invested in Naramata in 1970 and took her retirement investment. My grandfather thought she was slightly crazy and invested it in agricultural land in the Okanagan Valley, which really doesn't resemble anything to what it looks like at this point in time. But she had a vision, and she was one of Canada's first female architects, actually. And so she really found a lot of pleasure and satisfaction in finding this particular location and building the kind of culmination of her professional pursuits in building the house here on the farm. And my grandfather came around, and he eventually as well fell in love with the site. It's pretty hard not to in Naramata. It's quite a beautiful spot. But they built the house here on the farm, and he was an engineer, so together they collaborated on it. And over the process of working with a spouse and representing all those very passionate kind of professional passions that they were carrying, they battled, but in a mutually respectful way. And my grandfather came to refer to the property as Elephant Island. Elephant being a white elephant, because he never thought my grandmother were getting any return on her investment. And then the island was his commentary on her he would say obsession with the aesthetic. She would call it appreciation for the aesthetic. So my childhood was spent here in the summers. I grew up in a small town called Powell River on the west coast. But every summer we would decamp to Elephant Island, and it was kind of a cool story that, I would come back from summer holidays and be asked where I went, and it was this really magical place. I mean, everything's larger than life when you're small, and Elephant Island was that for me.
Now, Elephant Island was started during a period of time that wineries were not very common in BC, and as a matter of fact, it was kind of early on in that explosive growth that the industry saw, especially in the Okanagan. What was the inspiration to start a fruit winery when at the time pretty much everything else on the map was grape?
Yeah, it was an interesting period of time when we were establishing the winery, actually. So that was 1998, 99 when we first moved up here permanently. And a big driver for me at that point was my grandmother was getting to the point where she was deciding what to do with the property. And I really felt it was important that it stayed in our family. Uh, and the industry or the economy actually was quite depressed at that point. The landscape was vastly different here. It was primarily apple orchards and some cherry orchards. Um, Vineyards were the exception, not the rule. We were the sixth winery on the bench. So we like to say we're part of the original six, like the NHL, you know. And now there's 40. There's 40 different license holders on this 20-kilometer stretch of Naramata Road. And so when we came, I alluded to earlier the seed that was planted by my grandparents. Well, my granddad, in his retirement, surrounded by all this incredible fruit that was grown here and coming from an Eastern European background, he dabbled in producing, well, he made tons of different fruit wines and also distillates, which was totally illegal, but he had his own still engineered, being an engineer, and he made all sorts of really delicious things. And that was really part of the fabric of my experiences growing up here, was helping him and also participating in these incredible picnics that my grandma and he used to host in the orchard for our family. But they were largely centered around food and wine and his Kirsch and Calvados that he made. So we had that seed that, you know, this idea. Him and my grandmother had actually started a business plan probably 5 or 10 years previous. It was right around the time when Vera from Hillside and Gunther Lang had applied or lobbied the government to actually have a separate category for land-based wineries. So you know, there was some very fortuitous intersections of their relationships with people that were interested in creating an industry, a small industry around fermented beverages and distillates on the Naramata bench. So my grandmother and he had started this business plan. Then he got sick and passed away, and nobody in my family had done anything with it. Then we kind of fast forward to the 90s, end of the 90s. My husband and I had graduated from university. We were living in Victoria, and I was working for the Ministry of Environment, not in a field that I was more interested in working in the field, but I was working in a government office. And so we kind of just decamped up here and said, let's figure out if we can do something with this. And my husband was playing, of all things, professional lacrosse. So they flew him in and out of wherever he was. And it wasn't like professional lacrosse players don't make what professional hockey players make. But in our favor was a really high exchange rate on the dollar. So we took all the money he was making from that and got an extra 50% on the dollar, and with my grandma's support started the winery. So it was with that seed, that very depressed kind of economy, and looking at what the possibilities were on this particular property, that we were inspired to ferment something new and different. And when we first started, the opportunity to actually produce fruit wine did not exist outside of having a commercial winery license. This might be kind of boring for your listeners, but it actually is kind of the nexus of making a viable artisanal fermented beverage, beer, wine, distillate, in that the government will allow us to sell direct and make it financially feasible. So at that point, we didn't have that opportunity. So we kind of had to lobby and get out and shake some trees and get in the media and say, why can't we as farmers have the same opportunity as our vineyard growing neighbors to have this value added market? So timing worked in our favor, because apple farmers at that time were blockading Naramata Road because Chinese growers had just come on the market, and there was a massive flood of apples. And so one arm of the government was saying we need value-added markets for other fruit crops, and the other was saying, no, you can't do the same thing as your neighbor who's growing grapes. So in the first 2 years, we got that opportunity direct from our farm gate, but we couldn't sell to retailers or restaurants. We were still considered commercial. But over time, and with I think a little bit of critical mass, then that opportunity obviously changed, and the landscape's much different now. Obviously, Naramata Bench has the 40 wineries, lots of vineyards, not very many orchards anymore, and there's quite a few fruit wineries that exist in BC now.
Yeah. So there was a lot of inequities between being a grape winery and a fruit winery back when you started. And actually, I would argue that there still is today in many ways. And that really held you back for the first few years. When you were developing the concept that your grandparents had come up with, which was building a fruit winery in the Naramata, was that something that you took on as a passion project for yourself, or was it more driven by the family and wanting to support their vision?
No, at that point it was just Dell and I. My grandmother was here and definitely present on the property, but we were here supporting her ability to age in place, and she was here supporting our ability to produce wine she could drink. But she, like nobody really from our respective families was interested in it at that point or saw the opportunity. It was Dell and I, motivated really by, I think, I don't know, there's something magical about Naramata and Elephant Island, and I think just recognizing that there was a real opportunity here. And full disclosure, we drank a lot of beer and really bad, you couldn't even call them cocktails at that point in our lives. So our experience outside of having this history of these really beautiful picnics and helping my grandfather make it as a kid was, there wasn't a lot of knowledge or I would say at that point appreciation for finely made wines and spirits. It was at that point that we really kind of dove in and started to learn and see what the opportunity was and get some practical experience in some of the neighboring wineries that were on the bench at that point.
Yeah. So in the early years, I'm sure there was a lot of challenges. In particular, you mentioned the inequities, but what are some of the other things you found in the first few years in creating a brand new industry? People weren't really educated about fruit wines. Maybe you weren't even educated about fruit wines. What were some of those things that you found that were really challenging to overcome, and how did you overcome them?
Honestly, I thought, at the time we anticipated, and I would say a lot of the bankers that we dealt with anticipated that we would have much more prejudice around the impression of fruit wine as kind of the secondary redheaded stepchild of a traditional vinifera wine. But we really found that that once we got wine in people's mouths, the impression completely changed, and they were very open to tasting. I think we kind of benefited from timing. The industry at that point was quite small, actually. Like I said, there was only 6 wineries on the bench. We were part of the Association of BC Wine Growers, which was maybe 30 or 40 wineries up and down the whole valley. And our producing neighbors were so supportive in terms of sharing expertise, and I think the public was generally quite open to trying, and that just actually getting the product in people's mouths. And I think one of our huge wins at that point was hiring a winemaker that was trained. You've used Christine as well, so classically trained, and brought a professionalism to the wine at the end that fruit wines had not historically been afforded. So like what we were producing was driven by an intention to produce something that was super expressive and the best stylistic fit for the fruit in question. We wanted to have food friendly wines. We didn't want to have one dimensional wine. And that served us really, really well. The challenges for us came in around the technical handling of a lot of the fruits because there was nothing else that existed out there that, there's a lot of trial and error in terms of, the first year we picked, just historically cherries were picked with stems on. Well, we didn't realize till after we had them all picked, and I can't even remember, but I'm, like we're talking thousands and thousands of pounds that the equipment we had would not take the stem off the cherry. So, we had to stand around, my dad still talks about this modified screen door on 2 sawhorses and like taking off thousands and thousands, literally a carpet of stems of these cherries. So things like that, and understanding, okay, well, the pits of cherries, again, I go back to cherries, this is a cherry orchard, but the pits of cherries, you can't break too many of them, it imparts such a bitterness, but also they have cyanide in them. So by the way, do you want to have a product that is like poisoning your customer? We never had that issue, but like it was trying to develop and sort of trial by fire in terms of being able to adapt a lot of the traditional processing equipment so that it would be functional and efficient and do what we needed it to do with the other fruits we were using.
Wow, that is very interesting. And it's so fun to hear because it is exactly the same experience that we had, only probably 15 or 20 years later after you started experiencing it. I got the very same experience of learning a new industry where not a lot was known about it. So there wasn't a lot of research you could do. And as you're developing out your techniques and your processes, we were incredibly fortunate as well. That's one synergy that both of our wineries have in common is that Christine Leroux is our winemaker consultant. And she came in early on at Northern Lights and really professionalized what we were doing. It was very easy to say that you could make something in a carboy with 22 liters and have a product that was really, good quality. But doing that on a commercial scale is very different. And then just the knowledge of all the different things that can go wrong that unfortunately for you, fortunate for us, was discovered over the years in terms of color stability and protein and pectins within the products and how to make sure that the consumer was getting something that they were really going to appreciate. So having Christine on board was huge for us. Were there any other winemakers or winery owners who you developed relationships with over the years because it was so new and there's a few that were very strong in terms of their voices within building the wine industry in BC. Is there any that you can remember off the top of your head that you really appreciated?
Oh yeah, 100%. Like, I mean, I think Naramata is a pretty small and tight community, and certainly back then the wine community was even that much tighter, but like Bob Ferguson and Alex Nickel. Bob Ferguson's at Kettle Valley, and Alex Nickel was Nickel Vineyards. At the beginning, when we were just getting started, they were super. They were really, really always there to lend a hand or offer advice. They were great. They were great ambassadors for the wines as well. They appreciated them. They liked what was different about them, and they saw where they had a fit. And I think that was really lovely in that, we had that instant credibility because our colleagues and I should say at that point, we were really young compared to most of the other people in the industry. Now we're really old, but but then we were young. We were like, I think when we moved up here, we were definitely under 30. We were 27, 28. And like I said, didn't have any real previous business experience or and not a lot of wine consumption experience. By that point, we dove in, and Dell had worked at Red Rooster for a couple of harvests or a year, and he'd taken the winemaking course at OUC, and I was taking a business course through Community Futures actually here. But yeah, those two guys were awesome. And then just over the years, I mean, the community of Naramata and the winemaking community in particular has always been pretty tight. We were involved in founding an organization called the Naramata Bench Winery Association. So it was one of the first regional wine marketing organizations. And, part of that was, it was really fun to socialize with those guys. So going and getting together and collaborating on initiatives to promote Naramata as a wine touring destination was also really fun, because we just like hanging out and sharing information too. Like a lot of it was learning as we went. So Lake Breeze and Garen Elms, we've shared equipment with them over the years. David and Cynthia Enns from Laughing Stock, same thing. Like there's so many people that over the years have been really instrumental in, I think, the collective growth of this region, and certainly for Elephant Island too.
Yeah, in the wine industry in BC, that's something that when we first got involved was almost shocking to a degree, that there is a level of support from other wineries that you don't see in other industries. They don't appear to really feel like anybody is competition within the British Columbia industry. They're really looking at all the other wineries as developing out a brand and a reputation that will support everybody. And the philosophy of a rising tide lifts all boats, meaning that if more people drink BC wine, whether it be fruit or grape, then everyone benefits from that. You clearly demonstrated that, and others demonstrated that to you. But one thing, and I don't want to call you a grandmother in this, but you're kind of the grandmother of fruit wineries, because you were really the one who led the way, and you also have led the way within the wine industry as a whole. So you've been very instrumental as a leader and a voice within the community in terms of driving initiatives that are going to support not just your own winery, but others. Where did that leadership ability start? And was there a moment that you realized you had to be the one to step up to really drive some of these things home?
Yeah, it's funny to be acknowledged in that way. I don't really see myself necessarily as that person. I guess part of it is just when I see that something makes sense, I like to, I'm not afraid to talk about it, I guess. And maybe at some point that's what it needs, is a voice. I do like working with people too, like collaboratively. I feel like, well, we joke here that, we're a huge picture, and then then everybody else has to come up and support us by saying, well, did you think about this? And actually, how is the GST going to be applied to that? And where does this get funneled through? So I think that I'm stronger, my business is stronger by working collaboratively with people. And I think part of it too is just like constantly trying to learn. Like you can always be learning something from someone, and you never know all the answers. You never have enough time to be able to access all the information that potentially is out there. So by being open to those opportunities where you can collaborate, I just find it really rounds out your own personal objectives. And it's not even objectives, it just feels like it's the right thing to do, I guess, more than anything.
Yeah. And when you think of clouds and dirt, right? So you're an entrepreneur from the traditional sense, in terms of you're thinking, your head is in the clouds, you're thinking about what's going to be best long term for the industry and for your business and for the consumer. But in the dirt, of course, is another very incredibly important component, which is the actual operation and execution of the business. Did you have to surround yourself with people to be able to be so successful in that way, or were you able to transition between the two as you were developing?
I mean, I think originally we did a lot of stuff, and I mean, we still do a lot of stuff ourselves. It's pretty hands-on. I mean, this year is the first year I've ever hired a tasting room manager, and it's like, I don't know why it took me so long, but and it's not that I want to micromanage everything, but I guess that there's parts of the business that just feel like they're so personal that you want to be remain really connected to them. Um, but I think that, as you get older, you kind of realize that there's this harmony. It's not balance that you're trying to achieve, because you're never like in balance between work and family, or work and life. But, you know, at some point, if you look at it on balance for the year, if there's sometimes you're up here for family and sometimes you're up here for work, on average, are you balanced out? And that harmony that exists, I think, is something that I I don't know if it's out of COVID or how that realization has come, but it's like we need to be able to try to balance out what we're doing, and in order to do that, you need certain support and you need certain consistency. And I think our businesses are a little bit difficult too, because there's this real strong seasonality to them, and that component makes it difficult to get teams and employ them year round and figure out how that how that's going to be administered. So, um, but we're really lucky. Like I consider the team that we have here. Many of most of our core employees have worked for us for more than 10 years, and really they're more like family than they are employees, and we're really lucky to have people that care very deeply about what they're doing and consider it as much their own as ours, which it is.
So when you're talking about balance in terms of life and family and your work needs and your business needs, and those things can change so dramatically. But in the last couple of years, there's been a lot of challenges because of the pandemic, but also changes within the industry. It seems like there's this never-ending cycle of opportunity and challenge within the industry. What are some of the what are some of the ways or the strategies you've taken to try and continue to make sure that your mental health is balanced during such a difficult time?
I run. That's a big part of my mental health piece. Having an outlet that is outside, actually, like making sure that I'm not tied to the desk all day. Um, yeah, just changing the landscape, even shifting a little bit, right? To be able to, like, you kind of get into this cycle of like, oh, I got to do this, this, and this. My list is this long, and then you realize you've sat here for like 3 hours, and what have you really accomplished? Whereas if you just get up and take a little walk, it's like, oh, that's what I was, trying to work through, or there's a solution there that I didn't actually think. And much of it for me is just a little bit of a change of scenery or change of perspective that I need to have. Um, yeah, I think that's pretty much my core pieces. And like I said, just like looking for that harmony. So making sure that I don't feel guilty when I'm trying to take time off and trying to really check out, which is a hard part, I think, for a mom and for I think, I don't know, maybe I don't like to say this when I'm talking to men, but I feel like it's more of a female thing.
Yeah. Well, within the industry, it is certainly can be difficult because there's also definitely many inequities in terms of the male to female ratio at the helm of a lot of these wineries. You are a very strong leader and recognized within the industry. Have you tried to mentor more women and minorities to become leaders and eventually potentially owners of their own wineries?
Not 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 objective, like not, I haven't gone out and intentionally done that. But I have to say, it's funny when you look at our winery, like we're very female skewed. And again, it's not an intentional thing, but I guess that there is this uh, strong strong attraction to working here or landing here or whatever you want to call it. And then I look at many of the volunteer roles I have, and they're like one of my most rewarding groups that I'm involved with now is called Naramata Slow, and it's a we're one of, well, now three, I think, cheetah slow living recognized certified communities in Canada. It's an Italian designation that's kind of the offshoot of slow food, but it's slow living. So we haven't quite got to the slow part of living here, but but we have a great group, and we have been able to accomplish a tremendous amount of things with this small little group of 8 people. During COVID, we raised over $1 million to buy a piece of parkland, and that group is primarily women. So it's not necessarily that I've intentionally set out to mentoring, or, and maybe I'm just not at that stage in my life yet. I think my kids are still young enough that they require me to mentor them. Although they wouldn't acknowledge that that's what is happening. But our youngest is just 11, so that's still a full-time mom job. And our oldest was supposed to go to university last year, but he blew out his Achilles tendon, so he ended up deferring a scholarship, and he's going in September. But even then, like, he's just like a man child is what I describe him as. I hope he doesn't see this podcast because he'd be horrified, but they need their moms. So I guess I'm not yet at the mentoring part yet, but eventually.
Yeah, well, we all need our moms, and certainly I'm no exception to that. Mom, I love you if you're listening to this. But you also are really great with the experiences of the people coming to your facility. And you have a relatively unique setup for your wine shop. And maybe you can describe it to those who haven't been to Elephant Island before, and how you really set out to provide a different experience they can find from other places within the Naramata Bench.
Yeah, well, it was quite a unique experience up until before COVID, actually. And now I think it's probably going to be more of a standardized experience. But from the outset of our tasting room really kind of getting busy and having some traction, so probably around 2005, 2006. And this is my mom. She was helping in the tasting room, and she was like, why don't we have people sit down outside? It's so crammed in here. Let's just sit down and share the wines with them in that way. So I pass all the credit to her for starting that initiative. And then it just became a signature in that we have this beautiful tree shaded courtyard that I attribute that space to my grandmother. Of course, being the architect, her big one of her core beliefs was designing an inside outside space. So it's kind of like this wonderful outdoor room, and we have our guests seated and offer a tasting experience in the courtyard. So just instead of having to belly up to the bar and get your elbows out, I think people really responded to having the opportunity to sit and consider and savor. And hopefully, it became a more useful medium for us to make, like, my big thing is we want our wines to be the hero of our customer's story. And so by having them seated and relaxed, that just gave a better opportunity to create that connection and really allow people to appreciate that.
Well, certainly I recognize that. And when you go to your facility and There's this huge grand tree, and you set yourself underneath it. It's nice because it's shaded, as of course it's very hot in the Naramata region, and they come by and they try the wines. It allows you to focus more on the product than it does on what's in the wine shop, right? And I've one thing that I've always regretted about other winery experiences that I've been to is that most of the time you're looking at a wall full of awards and wines when you're tasting, and it doesn't allow you to really immerse yourself in what you're tasting and think about it as like an experience where everything around you is connected, right? You see the fruit trees, you know where the fruit comes from. The people there are very educational, and then you can have an opportunity to try these delicious wines in a slower environment, which I guess really lends to what you were talking about earlier. Do you consider yourself a farmer or a winemaker? I mean, I know you mentioned earlier you don't do too much wine making, but do you consider yourself like a winery entrepreneur or a farmer?
I relate more to the farm. My husband likes to joke that I like to think I'm a farmer, but I'm not. But I think that that's what really, um, we have chickens and I'm getting sheep this year, which is much to his chagrin. But that's the part that I think really, as I look forward to the future, I think that we have, and we got into this. One of the reasons why we started a fruit winery was because we felt it was important that there was agricultural diversity, and that we were giving a market for other farms, not just grape vineyards, but supporting other forms of agriculture. And so, just like looking into the future, I think we have a really important role as stewards of the land, and I think there's a huge opportunity for us to contribute to, the betterment of our little corner of the planet by like changing how we are doing things. And so we're going away this year completely from herbicides. So we're moving towards a I'd like to go to this regenerative model, but in the short term, organic, and then we'll see where we get from there.
Well, that's incredible. I look forward to seeing that as it progresses. And you have diversified your portfolio over the last few years as well. When did that happen, and what was kind of the idea behind expanding your selections?
So I guess the first iteration was looking to round out our portfolio on the Elephant Island side with traditional vinifera wine. So we bought another property oh no, we replanted a portion of our home block in 2009. And part of it was like we wanted to kind of speak to any critics that we had out there that said we didn't make real wine at Elephant Island, and demonstrate that we were applying the same techniques and carry it from dirt to bottle. So everything we were growing, we were making into wine. So we added the vinifera component in 2009. Then we expanded and bought another farm in 2013, I think. So now we have a really nice life cycle, I think, and a real rounded portfolio on the wine side of things, having both fruit wines and then full spectrum to traditional vinifera wines. And then in 2017, we added the Naramata Cider Company. And, that was part of one of the original iterations. We looked at a cidery. And at that point, again, we were trying to plug a square peg into a round hole. There was no license opportunity. And really, we felt like we could do more with some of the sparkling wines that we were doing as wine versus cider. But that market really took off in 2017. And I think that the real game changer for me was when I was reading a magazine and I opened up like the center ad, which must have cost like, I can't even imagine, $500,000 in like this massive publication, and it was Stella Artois, and their tagline was 75% hand-picked apples for this new cider they were launching. I'm like, really? This is ridiculous. So then we launched Naramata Cider Company. We'd been making cider through, just for personal consumption at that point, and felt like it really deserved its own home. And there was lots of interesting things that were happening. And so developed that. And we ultimately, our goal was to buy another farm and have a dedicated farm for the cider company. But in the interim, real estate prices in Naramata went like crazy, and we didn't feel comfortable having the Naramata Cider Company in Penticton, or some other location. So now it exists. It exists here at Elephant Island. We make all the wine and cider here. And then we started another project in just last year called Dell's Super Cool, which is it's just a sparkling wine in a can. But we're facing a few headaches with that one right now, because we don't conform to what the government wants to call wine, and they want to call us refreshment beverage, and that's a whole nother story that involves a little bit of drinking to get through. But that we're navigating that particular challenge.
Yeah. How do you find it balancing all of these? I mean, each one of those in itself is a whole business that would require a lot of thought to go through it. How do you balance that with what you're doing on a day-to-day basis?
I don't know if I'm doing it very well. Like, sometimes I think when, one of the COVID exercises I went through was like looking at how many SKUs we produce and saying, okay, what are we doing ourselves justice here, and what are we not? And so I think that longer term, we need to look at kind of streamlining some of those things. But I guess, for myself and for Dell, we sometimes get carried away by the potential and the process. I guess it's that huge picture. And, there's always things we could be executing better to maybe build some of those brands. But at this point, they're doing what they need to in terms of creating great products and drinks, and they have their fan base. And if they are going to morph into something bigger, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. But right now, the brand, the two for sure, Elephant Island and Naramata Cider, are pretty stable and doing their own thing. And we have a finite capacity in terms of what we can actually physically produce and sell here. And we're probably at that limit right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when you're creating these new projects, there's a lot of innovation and excitement. But by dropping one ball, if you're holding 10, it's probably not the end of the world, because the net sum game is that you continue to move forward with innovation. You're a leader within the industry. Do you find that there's a lot of pressure now that you've been so established for so long with the young guns like myself, so to speak? Because we're always looking for that mentorship and that leadership. Where do you find your role is best placed?
I guess just keeping on, right? Like, keep driving forward. I think that that's one of the big takeaways out of COVID for me, was that, we just have to continue to move forward, because if we're moving somewhere. And I think that it's kind of, I guess, that analogy when you're running too, like if you're running really long distances, it's like, just keep moving. So you'll get to where you need to get to eventually. And I think that seeing what is happening elsewhere in the industry is just, it's exciting. Like, I take inspiration from what successes other people are having, and I think it becomes it's more of a collective, right? The success of new players into the industry means that there's more people that are exposed to different wines, different ways of delivering wine experiences. And really, I think, like on the fruit wine side of the equation, it's kind of an exciting, really an exciting segment of the wine industry because of the demographic shift that's happening right now. So seeing what other people are doing, and creatively how they're working within the framework that we're required to work from the perspective of regulatory is, it's really cool. And I mean, I think too, like, the benefit that younger people or people that come from other areas of expertise they bring to the equation is those experiences and that knowledge base, like, like all the stuff you guys have done with social media and the hospitality piece, and like, just carving out a whole new frontier. Like, I mean, that in and of itself is amazing, really. Like what those types of opportunities show to other producers is that here there is, where there's a will, there's a way. And when you think outside the proverbial box, like, there's cool things that are happening. I think a lot of this stuff too right now with COVID and climate change and supply chain challenges, like, I feel like we're in a really dynamic phase, and we're kind of on the cusp of all sorts of really innovative ways of looking at how we can deliver both an experience and a product to consumers.
So you've seen so much change over the last 25 years in the industry since you got started. As the industry progresses for the next 25 years, where do you think the biggest opportunities lie? And I know you've kind of mentioned a few here, but are there any major trends that you believe will become larger in the future?
Well, I think there's going to be a real kind of metamorphosis of what wine looks like and tastes like, potentially, in terms of how it's presented to the consumer and what the consumer is willing to try. Uh, you know, I think, we've always operated within this landscape where 80% of the wine was being consumed by 20% of the population. Well, that 20% is not drinking nearly as much. And the people that are coming in to take over are way more open to different things, different wines, different formulations. Like, I mean, like some of the stuff, this kombucha, like, these weird blends of fermented living fermentation, CBD, all that kind of stuff is all becoming more and more relevant. And I think, for me, one of the most exciting things is trying to move away or look at alternative forms of packaging. Like, I think out of the last 2 years that, this thought that everything has to go in a glass bottle somewhere and it can be only used once. Like, I really hope that out of all of this, that some of these reviews that are happening, there's support from within the collective industry and or from government to look at reusing packaging, like washing some of the glass that comes through our recycling stream. They do it for beer, and there's enough consistent molds that we should be doing it for our industry as well. And then, like, things like Tetra Paks or cans or bag and box or other, like, that nobody's even come up with yet. Those are the kinds of things that I think are really exciting. I think there may be a movement more towards, as much as we are we're pretty big supporters of local in BC. I feel like there may be even more of that coming down the pipe. Hopefully, eventually we can actually legally supply the rest of Canada. But yeah, I think as a whole, just innovation and less, staid and true red wine is 14%. And I mean, like, we're already seeing the alcohol contents go up so much just because of how hot it's been. We had a Chardonnay this year that was 14.9%. Delicious, but 14.9%. And it was just so hot out, right? So, I mean, I think we have to, if we're talking about health, and there's more and more awareness about health and alcohol, we have to be able to adapt, which right now is really difficult within the constraints of existing regulation, to be able to provide the consumer with other choices and other beverages that are maybe not just a conventionally fermented wine.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, the industry has gotten so complicated, and yet there's never been more opportunity than there is right now if you're able to take advantage of the way the industry is moving, which there is no doubt is changing substantially. And also, the term wine, I think, is going to change over time as well in terms of what consumers are looking for. And wine has a very traditional sense when you talk about it in terms of what it is and what it can do, but the new consumer coming out doesn't have those biases that maybe our traditional consumer that's been drinking wines for the last 40 to 50 years has had. So never more opportunities. Is there any other exciting things coming down the pipeline for Elephant Island and your group of companies that you're willing to share with us?
No, I'm trying to like streamline and simplify. No, we are I think yeah, like I mean this move towards looking at alternative packaging and creating experiences that allow people to indulge, not just indulge, it shouldn't be an indulgence, but actually appreciate wine in different places, and without having to tote around a glass bottle everywhere. That's kind of really at the forefront of what we're doing, and then augmenting that with this commitment that we're making towards this regenerative agriculture, and sort of building out the experiences on farm in terms of having people being able to do different tastings in different parts of the farm. Those would be a few things that I think are definitely on the horizon. Whether or not they'll happen this year or next year, we'll see.
That's amazing. Where can people find you on the social channels if they'd like to stay in touch?
So we're at Elephant Isle, at ELEPHANTISL, on Twitter, or no, not Twitter, sorry, Instagram and Facebook, and online, elephantislandwine.com.
Well, that's wonderful. You've enlightened us a lot. You can find Elephant Island wines across the province of BC, or of course, if you're anywhere near the Naramata, I highly, highly recommend coming by, saying hi to Miranda, and checking out some delicious products. This has been another episode of You Sip, I Sip. I'm Doug Bell. Thank you very much, Miranda. I'm going to be having a bottle of your wine tonight, and I can't wait to hear more about what you're doing in the future. I'll be keeping in touch. Thank you so much, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you for listening to You Sip, I Sip. Please hit the 5-star rating and leave us a review. If you'd like to learn more about Northern Lights Winery, text us at 604-670-4046 or visit us on social media at Northern Lights Winery.